high-level panel on digital cooperation and the recommendation that were made on those in that report. And I think it's time for Africa to make its contribution to the report, and kind of we reflect our position, what we think on the issue of digital cooperation, and that's why I'm interested in this session. Henriette, I give you the floor. Please go ahead and start the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adil. I will enable my camera so you can see me. Greetings to everyone from Johannesburg, and thank you for joining us today. First, I'm going to tell you about our panel. And not all our panelists have arrived, but a lot of them have, and they are all excellent people to speak on this topic. Today, we'll have Honorable Masani Koroni from the West African IGF Parliamentary Network. He's from Niger, but he has not confirmed his participation, so he might not join us. We have Ms. Zhang Honghu, the program specialist from UNESCO, who has actually been part of the African IGF this week. We have Nena Mwakanma, Chief Web Advocate from the World Wide Web Foundation. She is from Nigeria, but living in Ivory Coast. And in fact, if you ask her where she's from, she'll say she's from the internet. We have Mr. Dawood Bekele, the Regional Vice President for Africa for the Internet Society. And we have Mr. Pierre Naginou, Vice President of Stakeholder Engagement for the Africa region of ICANN. And we also have, and he's with us, we heard him just now, Mr. Maktar Sek, Economic Affairs Officer from the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And I'm very pleased to also introduce Ms. Anna Ekeledo, Executive Director of AfriLabs. AfriLabs is a network organization that supports more than 200 technology innovation hubs all across Africa. I think they have hubs in almost 50 different countries. So the topic, I want to start just by I'm going to share my screen, and Adil already made a reference to this process, the digital cooperation process that was initiated by the UN Secretary General. So let me just find the right page and I will show you. Just give me a minute. Zoom screen sharing is not always so intuitive. Francis, are you ready with our poll?
Yes, I'm here. Joshua's going to share it. I haven't received your mail yet.
Great.
So Joshua,
okay, so everyone, while I get together, before I share my screen, we are starting the session today asking you, everyone in the room, your opinion about something. So Francis, you can go ahead and launch the first poll.
Joshua.
I'm here. I'm just trying to set it up. Give me a few minutes.
If you need a bit more time, I can go ahead with my presentation.
Yes, that would be awesome. Maybe start and.
Good. Okay, so while Francis brings up the poll, I just wanted to show you the. Hang on. I'm really sorry. I'm just struggling to find the right web page here. Where is it? Here it is. Can you see that now? Can you see on your screens Secretary General's Roadmap for Digital Cooperation? Can you see that?
Yes, we can see.
Confirm? You can. Great.
Yes, we can see it. Yeah.
Perfect. So let me give you the background to this before we look at our poll and go to our panel. A few years ago, the UN Secretary General convened a body referred to as the High-Level Panel for Digital Cooperation. You'll see it highlighted in this text. And this panel worked from 2018 to 2019. It was made up, it was a multi-stakeholder panel. It had, I think, a few representatives from Africa, and not many. But they came up with recommendations on how different stakeholder groups around the world can collaborate more effectively in this area of digital development and the internet and internet expansion and internet security. And the next step out of this high-level panel came a report. And that report included quite substantial recommendations, but they were also quite complex. And what the Secretary General then did this year, the UN Secretary General, was to move from this high-level panel report to a more accessible document called the Secretary General's Roadmap for Digital Cooperation. Now, this roadmap is the document that we actually need to keep at the back of our minds when we talk today. And in this roadmap for digital cooperation, the Secretary General highlights 8 different areas where he feels we have to improve cooperation between states, between different stakeholder groups, and between different parts of the world, and within countries as well. These 8 areas you can see in front of you now. Achieving universal connectivity by 2030, and secondly, promoting digital public goods to create a more equitable world, and 3, ensuring digital inclusion for all, including the most vulnerable, 4, strengthening digital capacity building, 5, ensuring the protection of human rights in the digital era, 6, supporting global cooperation on artificial intelligence, 7, promoting trust and security in the digital environment, and 8, building a more effective architecture for digital cooperation. I think it is fair to say that none of these areas have no cooperation in them. I think that there is cooperation. I think we are sitting at the moment in the African IGF, being organized by an African institution, the African Union Commission, that has tried to facilitate cooperation. But I think the message that comes across in the Secretary General's report is that there's not enough cooperation, and the cooperation is not necessarily achieving the desired results. And I think this creates a good opportunity for us as African stakeholders who care about the internet to think about cooperation, about what we have achieved, what we can still do, but also to think about what it is that we are doing that is perhaps not getting enough recognition. And so do we need to build on what we've already achieved? Do we need to create new mechanisms? And in fact, this is where the idea of architecture, building a more effective architecture for digital cooperation comes into play as well. And one of the proposals that emerged from this process is to strengthen the IGF, the existing Internet Governance Forum, which is not just an event, it's part of a whole infrastructure and ecosystem, including the national and regional and youth IGF initiatives. But that is really what this roadmap is. And the Secretary General has invited people around the world to be part of this process. As you can see, this process is bigger than internet governance. It involves various aspects of digital cooperation. And that is kind of the milestone where we are now. This is not a new topic for the African IGF, by the way. Those of you who were at the African IGF last year and in 2018 would have heard about this process. But I think it's fair to say that there probably has not been as much debate and dialogue around this process in Africa as there should be. So before I ask my panelists to respond to this, I want to check if Josh or Francois, Francis, the tech team, are you ready with the first poll? Great. So this is just to give all of you a chance to react and share your perspectives. So just choose one of those options. And we'll give everyone a chance and then we can share the result. We'll just wait a few minutes. About half of the people in the room have responded. I think that's fine. You can share the result now. So I think this is actually good news. The question that I ask is, do you find the concept of digital cooperation easy to understand or not so easy? 50% of respondents said they find it easy to understand. About 41% said that they have a general idea of what it means, but they're not completely sure. And 10%, they don't know what it means. And the reason that I raise this is because I think often when our international institutions, when our governments, and even when those of us in civil society start processes, we often just don't check that people really know what we mean. And I will try to explain what I mean today. If I don't, then please tell me in the chat. And I'm also inviting all the panelists who are going to contribute to try and to speak in plain language. And if they use any kind of jargon, to try and explain it. So we can stop sharing these results. I think that before I move on to the panelist, I just want to make sure that everyone has this URL. I will share it in the chat as well. And then we will move on to talking to I don't have access to the chat right now, but I will share the URL to this document in the next minute or so. So now to take us into the discussion, and assuming that digital cooperation is something that we feel that we approach as being cooperation around implementation, as well as cooperation at the level of policy making. I'm asking my panel, what do you think? How would you, if you were to reflect on these 8 areas of cooperation from an African perspective, which one, I'm going to ask you to select one, but then please explain why you think we should prioritize this particular area in Africa. And maybe you can also reflect on whether you think it should be a priority and if the roadmap is perhaps missing anything. But let's start with the first area, achieving universal connectivity by 2030. Dawood Bekele, you've been working to extend access in Africa for most of your, or at least for the last 20 years. And can you reflect on what you think, why that is a priority, and perhaps also how you think we're doing in Africa with regard to cooperating to achieve universal connectivity?
Thank you, Henriette, and good afternoon to all. I think the COVID crisis has shed light on the importance of connectivity in a way that we never could have imagined. For months, hundreds of millions of school children have connectivity managed to continue their education from home. Many of us have been able to work from home, but unfortunately, there were also many people around Africa and the world who didn't have connectivity, and for this reason, who couldn't learn or work. Therefore, I think we have understood the importance of connectivity much better in the last few months than I think the last few years. But connectivity will continue to become an important thing even after the pandemic. Many organizations and people who were very reticent to go online have tested the online world and are likely to continue to move online. For example, here in Ethiopia, where I live, the government has moved many of its services online, and those services won't go back offline. Therefore, I think having or not having access to the internet had an even greater meaning now than a year ago. It's between having education or not, between having critical services such as government, health services and not. In brief, it's between development opportunity and not development opportunity. Thus, universal access has a stronger meaning today than a year ago, and I cannot agree more with the objective to have universal connectivity by 2030.
But Dawood, let me then ask a follow-up question. So there's increased awareness of why connectivity is so important, but is that being followed up by increased cooperation in achieving connectivity? Do you see more collaborative action? Do you see more concrete efforts to bridge that connectivity gap?
I think that is a problem. I think there is understanding at national level, for instance, that it is important, but it looks like everybody is trying to do its best by itself. We see it, for example, with some landlocked countries that have difficulties to get access to submarine cables just because their neighbors consider them as an opportunity for getting paid for the link rather than an opportunity for cooperation. So we have a long way to go, but I think there are some beginnings. I see some organizations such as the African Union Commission, as well as regional economic communities, are starting to work in order to improve cooperation within the regions.
And Dawood, if you were to, let's say, make a fire under someone, where do you think should the primary effort come from? Should it come from a global level? Do you think that we need to work at a regional level with our regional institutions? Or do you think it's at national level that there's not enough cooperation? So, I mean, maybe if you were to rank them and explain why, because I think cooperation, if we want to make cooperation concrete, we have to kind of say who it is that should be cooperating. So that will be my final question to you now, and then I'll move on to someone else.
I think we should start at national level because most of the activities are to be done locally, and then sub-regional, and I would move on to the regional and etc. Why? Because what's happening currently is that, for example, when we consider operators, they tend to work in many countries. Still, it's improved a lot, but many operators have connectivity that goes to Europe and so on, and they tend to not cooperate with the other operators. This increases the cost to the users, and this has to be avoided, and we should have more and more interconnection between our operators within the country, but also within the sub-regions. And also, I think the rite of passage should be much easier for interconnections between operators from one country to the other, which benefits everybody at the end.
Thanks, Dawood. I think I agree. I think that national level, working with regulators, working with operators is vital, working with local access providers. But now I want to move on to Anna. Anna, you work in this amazing cross-section of entrepreneurship and enterprise development and tech development. The next area that I want to ask you about that's in this roadmap, and I think one of the strengths of the roadmap actually is that it is so holistic, but this is the area ensuring digital inclusion for all, including the most vulnerable. Anna, you think this is a priority, don't you? And if you do, just explain why, and then you can perhaps also comment on how you think we're doing in addressing this cooperatively.
Yeah. Thank you, Henrietta. So yes, I do think that it's important. I do think that it should be prioritized as much as the others should be prioritized. I mean, all the areas are so important that it's hard to just pinpoint and say one should prioritize over the other because they're all complementary for each other to work. But absolutely. So in terms of digital cooperation, one of the important things to focus on is ensuring all groups, irrespective of gender, age, location, socioeconomic factors, and geography, are included in accessing infrastructure, education, products, services, and benefits of the digital economy, right? So when we talk about taking an inclusive approach, significantly bringing people who originally have been marginalized and have been outside the productivity bracket into significantly contributing to the social well-being, into the economic development of Africa and into the social well-being of citizens across the continent. Now, I'll give an example, right? So women make up over 50% of micro, small, and medium enterprises who primarily participate in agriculture, participate in trade, and other sectors, and largely in the informal sector as well. And yet, are often economically disadvantaged with little access to expanded markets, financial services, technology, education, and other digital services that can significantly improve or boost their business growth. And that has gotten worse with the COVID-19 pandemic. Referring to the report, the gender gap across the world is about 17% in terms of access to global internet use, for example. But in developing countries or in undeveloped countries, it's even worse. It's as high as 43%. And these challenges cut across migrants, refugees, and other disadvantaged people. Now, by leveraging on digital technology and taking a very inclusive approach in terms of digital cooperation for the purpose of ensuring that everyone has access, what we'll be doing is bringing all these people to enjoy the advantages of digital technology. So, an example, and this is particularly quite exciting to us because operating in the technology and entrepreneurship ecosystem, we see the emergence of more e-commerce platforms and other digital trade facilitation platforms. Now, with these platforms, which are being developed by entrepreneurs across the continent, we will see usually marginalized groups such as women have the opportunity to move from the informal sector to the formal sector, as well as have access to broader markets, especially now as we're moving towards implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, right? And they'll be more likely to access other digital products and services that would help them trade, increase revenue, grow their businesses, and create jobs. Now, for all these to happen, we need to have the right digital education program. So we have to ensure that everyone is digitally literate, the right infrastructure. The previous speaker spoke about the importance of broadband connectivity, for example. We need high-speed and affordable broadband connections across the continent. And of course, the right policies in place. We need inclusive policies that are inclusive to women, marginalized groups such as refugees, and people in high crisis areas, for example. People in the most rural areas, economically disadvantaged, persons with disabilities as well. We need to consider these people. And largely, and finally, children. A lot of times when we have these conversations about digital technologies and building innovative solutions and startups and all of it, we need to start having the conversation from the early years, especially considering children who are currently out of school, increased again by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as digital educated from the early years to be able to be innovative, design solutions, and access jobs of the future. Just borrowing from the words of late Kofi Annan, he says education is a human right with intense power to transform. And I would add that digital education is fast becoming a human right, and we need to ensure that no one is left behind. Now, what are we doing? What do we need to do more of in terms of digital cooperation in this area? Well, I do know a lot is going on in terms of trying to be as inclusive as possible, creating, infrastructure and access and education and all of that. We have organizations like UN Women. Google has programs focused on women, for example. AfriLabs funds projects that specifically funds and partners and projects that specifically ensure that out of school children have access to digital technologies, for example, for education, and women, irrespective of their locations, and even identifying innovative solutions with people with persons with disabilities. The World Bank, of course, does all this work, but what needs to be done better is cooperation across various stakeholders. I mean, we absolutely need to take a multi-stakeholder approach, and that's why we're having this conversation in the first place, right? So if we talk about broadband connectivity, for example, which the government has a huge role to play, the government needs to have a conversation with innovation hubs, for example, who run centers that drive innovation and support entrepreneurship, with schools, for example, who use these technology, with the stakeholders from the grassroots level. They all need to be involved in the process, from global organizations to local, so that there needs to be that cooperation across board, with everybody basically considering each other in the design of strategy so that they complement each other. I mean, we haven't even touched the issue of research. That's a whole nother level altogether that needs to be included in the conversation as well, in terms of how we can be as digitally inclusive as possible. So,
but let me ask you, I agree completely, but in response to that, and obviously, I think we both agree there is already cooperation, but what are the bottlenecks? What's holding it back? Is it that states and other stakeholders, businesses, women's organizations are just too overwhelmed? Is it that there is lack of political will to work cooperatively? What is if there was like one critical intervention you would propose to change this so that there's more directed cooperation and conversations, what would you do?
Well, I would say there isn't enough of, I mean, all the other things you mentioned, political will and all of that, lack of resources, that of course is always a challenge, especially in development. But I think one of the main issues from what we see is people not understanding each other. And I say this because what we find, and this is something we see a lot with our work at AfriLabs, because we do work with various stakeholders, from government to development agencies, corporates, and all of that. Everybody basically speaks a different language, right? And this is, I mean, this is understandable because everybody has their own goals and, things they're looking to achieve and all of that. However, in terms of really developing our continent and just, achieving certain goals and mandates, such as, digital inclusion or any other mandate that we have, to take us to the next level and take advantage of digital economy, we need to have more dialogues where we break down our goals and all agree to work towards a common a mandate, or a common mandate, and then of course a series of mandates. I mean, the UN Sustainable Development Goals is an example, right? But the question is, are we all working towards it while still achieving our individual mandates, of course? So I think that it's a lack of understanding between the various stakeholders, with everybody basically just trying to achieve their goals as well.
I think that's a good point. I think one thing that's very important to acknowledge about cooperation is that it's not easy, or it's easier said than done.
Yes.
But thanks a lot for that. And
that is true. There needs to be frameworks and models to facilitate the conversations. Yeah.
Absolutely. And as you said yourself, that's why these multi-stakeholder processes like regional and national IGFs are so important. I now want to move on to the next priority area. There's strengthening digital capacity building. And Pierre Dagenou, Pierre, you have been a champion of digital cooperation in Africa since the 1990s, I think, when I first met you. Pierre is currently with ICANN, but he has been in many other spaces in Africa. Pierre, why do you think that strengthening digital capacity building is a priority, that it's good that it's in this digital cooperation roadmap? And maybe also reflect a bit on the state of digital capacity building cooperation in Africa.
Thank you very much, Henriette, and then very good morning and good afternoon to everyone. So I'm Pierre Dagenou and happy to join this IGF. Well, and also as the president, vice president, for ICANN in charge of Africa. And now to your question, I think for me, and I think most will agree with me, that what really matters here is about digital transformation of Africa. And that digital transformation occurred to me as quite important, is already happening. But one of the things I feel is that we still need those, skill and in beginners. Those skills that are quite important if we are yet to really reach the impact of this digital economy, or what I call digital transformation as well. It is important. Things have been done. Things are still there today. And the question could be whether this is sufficient, and eventually what type of collaboration one could run this sort of what I might call capacity building agenda for digital transformation in Africa. There are a few examples. AfriLabs, for instance, is trying a few things. We are kind of training people in code, understanding and applications. We do have developers. By the way, Africa still needs more of them. You know that Facebook, not to name it, itself only has more than 400,000, developers. In Africa, we still need more than that, but we are not yet there. It is happening anyway. We are training people as far as fintech is concerned, and all of these are part of the whole I would say kind of agenda that we may have in Africa. I would say it is there, but it's not quite sufficient. Now let me browse on a few areas where we are not really performing well, that we might be doing more, and also have sort of collaboration. And this is exactly where I work, which is ICANN, which is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Number, which has its strategy plan, and which role is about coordinating the unique identity of the Internet. Now, if you consider the Internet, and I'm not to go back to what David has just said, meaning during the COVID, this pandemic period, we all witnessed the importance, of this technology. So I'm not going back to that, although we at ICANN still have so many things to say about this usage of Internet during the COVID, which is about security, which is about DNS, and we could talk on that one later on. But we still few sort of capacity building in quite a distant area that pertain to digital transformation. And this is about, the whole thing, the DNS, the domain name system, because this is the basic of the Internet. And it's important that we make people understand this, but not only understand, hands-on, that they could practice those things. For instance, how to DNS? We use something that we call DNSSEC. And ICANN has been working on that, have been having DNSSEC, towers within Africa. It's about signing your zone file destination is secure. Well, of the 54 African countries today, we only have something like 9 to 10 of them, that have signed their zone file, meaning there still needs, there's some homework to do. So how do we do those? How do we do this? it's important that people be aware that this is quite important. How are we running, for instance, our country code, our CCTLD, the country code top level domain, meaning your .sg, your national, space somewhere. How are we running those things? Of course, we are using the .com, the .org, which is fine anyway. There's no problem with that. But if you have your own sort of CCTLD, why aren't you using those things? And one of the reasons, those things are not properly run. Meaning, again, we still need to have those skills, to be able to perform well and to really run, I would say, administer those CCTLD properly. There are associations that are doing this job, the FTLD, which is African Top-Level Domain Name Association, but it's not much because we are still seeing the same issues, meaning not many Africans are really using their own CCTLD, which is something important, especially if you want to embrace digital economy, because that's where you can also grow your economy. The domain is also about the inclusion. We all talk about the inclusion, and we know that the next billion of internet users will be coming from places like Africa and Asia and eventually Latin America, for instance. But there are things that those that are coming may not be the elite, as people like us, living the urban areas. And they might need to also access the internet in their own languages. And by the way, most of us in Africa, again, will be accessing internet, through our mobile. And this is something which is quite clear now. So how do you make sure that they could access it in their own languages? There are technologies to do this thing, to have your own, script, your language. So how are we working on that? We need to train people for that, and like ICANN has been doing. So it is important that we embrace those trends, I would say. And I would like to eventually finish on the potential for the collaboration. I think in the case of Africa, it will be quite important that we certainly think about what we might call an alliance or coalition, on capacity building for kind of digital empowerment, for Africa, which means that, yes, we need, it has to be kind of multi-stakeholder sort of approach. That's what we do within ICANN, okay? But the point here is that whether it's national level or regional level, let's make sure that government or decision makers, of course, are quite conversant with what we are talking about capacity building. Let's make sure that the private sector also play its role. They are playing anyway what they have to do, because you see all of them developing, programs because they do believe it's important, for the business, for the market. But we need to have a much more holistic approach, to this development. So how do you build that coalition? I think this is something I think we really need to think about. And we do have big programs, implemented in Africa. We have PRIDA with Africa Union, we have Smart Africa, we have the World Bank. All of them are having some part of capacity building portion. Now, what did it impact? We don't really know. We need to assess those, and then we need to build a comprehensive capacity building program. So that's what I have in mind, and that's what ICANN also is ready for. So maybe back to you, Harriet, for any other questions.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Pierre. And I think that, if I listen to you and I listen to what Anna said earlier, and the capacity building, the range, from young kids, preschool kids even, and school kids out of school, as Anna was saying, to the kind of institutional capacity building capacity of the internet sector and the internet industry. I think it's a huge challenge, really. I think the capacity development, I think one can never do enough, but I actually think it's a massive challenge. But it is important that we tackle it cooperatively, as you've said, but not so easy to get to see the results. But next although let me actually take that back. I think we do see the results of the work that ICANN is doing and the work that ISOC is doing. I think what we are often not seeing, we see results in silos. I don't think we are yet at a point where we can see the net effect of the results of capacity building efforts. And now I want to move on to Area 5 in the Secretary General's roadmap, ensuring the protection of human rights in the digital era. And Zhang Hong from UNESCO, this is something that is very close to the work of UNESCO, and UNESCO has been developing methodologies to measure this. And why do you think this is such a priority when there are so many other priorities in Africa?
Thank you, Henriette. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Can hear you clearly.
Okay, thank you. First, I'd like to extend our great thanks to you, Henriette, and also to the African IGF Secretary for inviting UNESCO to be on this very important and interesting panel. I also extend the warm regards from my director, Mr. Geiberger, who has to chair another important statutory meeting of IPDC council meetings. That's why I couldn't make him available. That's why I'm here to share some of our UNESCO's views. It's really amazing 2 days since yesterday. I'm very impressed by the quality discussion of African IGF, and also coming back to your question and also linking to what you initially asked about these 8 areas. I do think it's all of them should be prioritized. They are equally important because they are supporting each other. They are correlated. You just couldn't achieve one unilaterally without supporting other priorities. That's how I look at the issues of human rights. You know, the human rights is core mandate of United Nations. It's also ultimate goal of achieving the SDGs. And in the current situation of combating the pandemic, again, I've seen that human rights could be so vulnerable. While we are saving lives, we are also tend to violating human rights. If you look at how much the internet saves lives, but on the other hand, if we don't pretend the bottom line of human rights, those response measures, those combating disinformations, they could go further to undermine the freedom of expression, to undermine the privacy, to fail to deliver everybody's fundamental liberty and freedoms. So that's why it's crucial that to highlight the free expression in current situation, digital age. It should not be something you easily compromise. It's emergency, because there are international standards. That's why we are expecting all the member states to respect those international agreements. When you are making a policy, make sure that it's necessary, proportional, according to those international agreed standards. That's how UNESCO has been framing it in a more comprehensive and also consolidated framework. I can just summarize it in 4 letters. ROAM, as Henriette well known about it. UNESCO 195 member states, including all of you from Africa, we have endorsed this new framework since 2015 to promote human rights-based approach. That's R. Open internet, that's O. Accessible by all, that's the A, which also touch upon the issues of inclusion, capacity, language as well. And the number 4 is M, which is multi-stakeholder participation, which also all about how we can get these marginalized groups and the countries in the discussion to really protect those vulnerable in this digital transformation. And also to give teeth to these indicators, to this 4 broader principle, because under every principle, human rights are many rights, under openness are many standards. That's why we have developed together with the APC-led consortium by Henriette before to develop 303 indicators, including 109 core indicators to measure to what extent every national state has respected this human rights, openness, access, and multi-stakeholder standards. And by doing this evidence-based assessment, you can find many, many evidences what has been performing very well, what has been the gaps should be improved, and then you formulate the policy recommendations. I'm very pleased to inform you, Henriette, and also all my African colleagues. I'm so proud for Africa. You know, in just in 18 months since we endorsed this voluntary assessment of Internet universality indicators, we have already got 21 countries across 5 continents, including Europe, to assess these core indicators. And among these 21 countries, we have the majority, 8 countries, they are from Africa. And they include, yesterday we did a very good session. We exchanged the initial findings from these 8 countries' IUI assessment results. I found that this really makes sense to trigger this kind of a regional exchange, because you can see there are some shared challenges on human rights. For example, in the country of Kenya, maybe also many other countries, we have very solid law, regulatory frameworks, but there's a lack of capacity, lack of implementation measures to practice them. And in terms of right of privacy, that's also a very shared challenge in many countries. There's a lack of even sufficient laws and also the independent authorities to oversee the data protection. And there are also many other lessons learned among the different African countries. That's why I think this would be a very good basis for African countries to work together, because you are using the international agreed framework of universality indicator, and then based on this you can exchange, you can touch base on the policy challenges and then improve and share the good practice from each other country. Is my answer too long? I could stop here.
No, it's fine. I'm just checking our time. I think, Adil, if I'm correct, we have about another 40 minutes or so.
Yeah, that's correct. That is correct.
Great. So, Jean-Hon, I want you to ask a follow-up question, but just very quickly, because I do want to come to the others as well. But because you've now been part of this process where there've been voluntary assessments in, I think, Senegal, Kenya, help me, Tunisia, which other countries in Africa have done these assessments?
Oh, yeah, okay. I'm reading, you know, it's from yeah. Yeah, if you allow me,
my question is, based on these assessments. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry, could you repeat what you just said?
What I wanted. Yes, so my question is, based on these assessments that have been taking place in Africa, do you think that all stakeholders in those countries where the assessments have taken place would agree that human rights on the internet are a priority? Or is that still an area where we need to build more consensus?
Absolutely. Okay, first, the 8 countries in Africa we have been assessing. They are Tunisia, Sudan in North Africa, and then we have Benin, Niger, Senegal, Ghana in Western Africa. Then we have Kenya and Ethiopia in Eastern Africa. We have completed the assessment in Benin, Senegal, and also Kenya. 3 African completed the assessment. The other countries were still ongoing. Some are almost completed. But I must assure that human rights is one common shared concern by all these assessments. Particularly, they focus on the free expression and also the issue of privacy and personal data protection, and also gender-related gaps.
Thanks very much for that, Jean-Hon. And that's encouraging news, that there's a common belief that
I will share
women
the links to those reports in the chat, and
please.
we also will try to produce some regional review of the results from all this African assessment. That we can provide you more as a basis for the consensus.
And thanks, Zhang Hong. And now next, I want to move on to an area in the roadmap. In fact, if any of you get the time to read the roadmap, you will see that artificial intelligence is actually seen as a priority area, an area where as a human society, we are facing choices about how we deploy, how we think about artificial intelligence. So it has found its way as a priority. And supporting global cooperation on artificial intelligence is one of the 8 areas in the roadmap. Mokhtar, you said that you feel this is a priority and it's one that ECA is engaged in. Why is this a priority in Africa when we have so many other challenges? Why is artificial intelligence also a priority for us?
Thank you very much, Harriet, and thank you to moderate very well this session. Let me shift now in French to give some parity for the language.
Mokhtar, I just have to warn you that I cannot access the interpretation because of my Zoom, but that's fine. Everyone else will be able to.
Okay, all right. I will summarize after if we need it. Huh?
No, please. Okay.
I think l'intelligence artificielle est très importante au niveau de l'Afrique pour plusieurs conditions, parce qu'on sait qu'actuellement que l'intelligence artificielle interpelle tout le monde et est porteuse aussi de progrès technologiques impressionnants. On a vu ce qui se passe au niveau du secteur de la santé, au niveau aussi du secteur industriel. Donc, ça ouvre beaucoup de perspectives pour l'Afrique. Donc, même au-delà de l'Afrique, pour le monde. Et puis, si vous regardez un peu ce qui se passe au niveau économique, l'impact économique de l'intelligence artificielle, donc ça génère beaucoup d'emplois. Des fois, on dit qu'on espère que ça va générer 2,3 millions d'emplois. Et on connaît le problème de l'Afrique en matière d'emploi, de non-emploi des jeunes. Par exemple, vous avez, je crois, en Afrique, environ 85% des emplois sont dans le secteur informel et 91% des emplois des jeunes aussi sont informels. Donc, ce qui fait que l'intelligence artificielle peut créer à ouvrir des perspectives pour le marché de l'emploi en Afrique, d'autant plus qu'avec le Covid, l'Afrique est exposée et il est estimé qu'il y a 20 millions d'emplois qui sont menacés grâce au Covid. Et si je viens aussi au niveau de l'emploi des jeunes, le marché aussi du cloud, bien que le marché du cloud, ça représente environ 140, ça va représenter dans les années 2021 environ 550 milliards de dollars. Donc ça, c'est déjà quelque chose d'important. Donc, ça veut dire que l'intelligence artificielle est quelque chose d'extrêmement important et doit être une priorité en Afrique. C'est la raison pour laquelle, donc, au début, vous avez mentionné le groupe de travail des Nations Unies sur la coopération numérique, que ça fait partie des thématiques extrêmement importantes au niveau du système des Nations Unies. Mais cette intelligence artificielle aussi a beaucoup d'enjeux. Il y a beaucoup d'enjeux qui se posent, notamment au niveau des questions de droits de l'homme, les questions d'autonomie, les questions de justice et respect de la vie privée. Donc, c'est autant de choses qui se posent au niveau de l'intelligence artificielle. C'est pourquoi il est extrêmement important au niveau de la coopération numérique qu'on s'appesantit sur ce volet extrêmement important qui va définir un peu le domaine de l'espace numérique en Afrique. Tantôt, je pense que Pierre a parlé de la question des renforcements des capacités. Il y a David qui a parlé un peu de l'accès universel. Et l'intelligence artificielle, c'est des technologies très simples à déployer et qui vont contribuer à l'accès universel. Sachant que, bon, si on arrive à faire l'accès universel en Afrique, on peut créer 7 à 30% de nouveaux emplois, ce qui est extrêmement important. Donc, je m'arrête là. Yeah. I think if you don't have a translation, let me stop here.
It's okay, Maktar. I have been, our colleagues have been graciously typing the translation for me. So thanks very much for that.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think your remarks are really relevant, because I think it's easy for us to think this is not a priority because we have to deal with access and access to devices. But I think, as you point out, artificial intelligence and thinking about it touches on many other areas of policy development that we need to pay attention to, such as, for example, data protection.
I think now we can't talk about priority, ICT, digital priority without artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence touches on all sectors, health sector, industry sector, economic sector, social sector, all this area we need artificial intelligence. But now we have a lot of challenge in Africa, because we can't develop artificial intelligence without the required capacity, building the required skill for the digital skill to develop this artificial intelligence application. We need also this sound regulatory framework. It is very important to have this regulatory framework. Also, we have to build the capacity of the member state to understand how to implement this artificial intelligence application. Is something very, very important. Also, when you come up the digital cooperation in intelligence artificial, at the beginning, I think what you said is 50% of people understand the digital cooperation. It's okay, they can understand, but we have a lot of things to do in Africa to make this digital cooperation possible, because when we talk about digital cooperation in the artificial intelligence or other sector, we have the issue of coordination. What kind of coordination we should put in place? How this cooperation can not become competition, because you are going to have a lot of people engaged in this digital cooperation or artificial intelligence. Because for the artificial intelligence, you need the government, you need the public service, you need the academia, you need the private sector, you need the international agency. You need all this to work together to come up with one solution. Why, if you want, if you need, I can highlight some key activity undertaken by UNECA to put in place the digital cooperation for artificial intelligence in Africa.
Well, Mokhtar, can you share some links? Because I know ECA has worked on this. Share some links in the chat about ECA's work. I now want to move
okay,
to...
I'm going to share some, okay, I'm going to share something, but I'm going to show you one key important initiative we are going to put in the country. We are going to create an intelligence artificial center for Africa in Congo. And we are going to work together with UNIDO and ITU. And we are going to launch this project quickly, maybe as soon as possible in January. It is one kind of digital cooperation in Africa for artificial intelligence. Thank you. We are going also to set up the Intelligence Expert Advisory Board for Africa. Thanks. And I'm going to share some link in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mokhtar. I mean, this is very challenging, actually, because all these areas are important. But at the same time, I feel that we need to prioritize the priorities, but maybe not everyone have to prioritize the same priorities at the same time. But next, I want to move on to you, Nena. You are another champion of the internet in Africa, and you've been on all sides of digital cooperation. The area in the Secretary General's roadmap that I want to ask you about is promoting trust and security in the digital environment, which again has so many different dimensions. But why do you think is this important? And how do you think we are doing in Africa to achieve trust and security in the digital environment?
Very much, Amrit. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you. There's a little bit of an echo, but I think it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. I will try to speak slowly on 4 issues. The first will be why the trust and security issue is priority. The second will be on what the roadmap says about trust and security. The third will be what Web Foundation as an organization is doing. And finally, I will wrap up on where I see Africa as a continent going on this. So we've done 15 years of global IGF. And we are still at the point where between government and citizens, we don't have a trust. If you look at the countries where COVID-19 has been better managed, these are countries where there is greater trust between the citizens and their governments. So we still do not have that trust relationship between citizens and government. There is a debate on security and trust between government and the industry. And there has always been that distrust between industry and citizens. Our Women Rights Online report of 2020 shows that less women are online, yes, but even the women who are online do not trust the industries with their data. I think someone has already raised it. So overall, we do not have the same understanding of trust and security. Governments are looking at digital cooperation from security side. Citizens are looking at digital cooperation from trust side. And here we are, I'm speaking to you, you're speaking to me, you tell me you love me, I tell you I love you too, but what you say love is not what I mean by love. And we've been speaking for 15 years in IGFs, and we still do not have a common understanding of the things we're doing, and there is no one willing to commit to it. What has the roadmap put out on this? So one of the key measurable things that the Secretary General has put out at the roadmap is a broad and overarching statement to be endorsed by all member states, in which common elements of understanding on digital trust and security are outlined. So we are looking for this statement that will be endorsed by all UN member states. Now, this is what I want you to take away from this session. Everybody agrees that connectivity is important. Everybody agrees that inclusion is important. Why can't everybody agree that security is important? And this is what we mean by security. So even in Africa, what Ethiopia sees as security is not what Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya may see as security. And what I as citizens see as trust is not what industry will see as trust. So every day we keep speaking at different levels and no one hears each other. This statement is in the roadmap to be agreed by all, to be worked on in a multi-stakeholder manner. I have been following the digital corporation story for the past 2-3 years. And I can tell you what Web Foundation is doing, that we're in 4 working groups, including the one on digital trust and security. What is happening is that all other working groups are going on well, but that particular one on security, everybody is quiet on it. Basically because what appears as security to the global north may not be what is security to global south. Nobody wants to discuss it. Everybody wishes it will go away. And we know it's not going away. And so what happens is when we come to these digital cooperation meetings, every country reads a statement. There are no discussions. Everybody reads a statement and walks away. I have done 2 of these meetings this week. That is not where we can get, that cannot be cooperation. It was just like we're attending a meeting. Everyone reads a 5-minute speech and says thank you and walks away. We cannot do digital cooperation this way. We have to come to a dialogue. We have to come to agree on something that we can do today. So in as much as I do believe that connecting people, including people, are all problems, but this one, we're not even talking. We haven't started talking. So in September, immediately the 75th president of General Assembly stepped in. He's originally from Turkey. His name is Volkan Bozkır. Web Foundation led a group of over 87 entities and VIPs. We sent him a letter asking him to prioritize at the UN level trust and security in digital cooperation. That letter was sent, I think, on the 20th of September. We haven't received feedback from him yet. We're still following up. The other thing in digital cooperation is the appointment of a UN tech envoy. That would be the face of digital cooperation of the UN. Great. What we've done, thank you very much, Henriette, in your role as Chair, we have mobilized over 80 organizations. We have written to the Secretary General saying, as civil society, as industry, as think tanks, as academia, as non-state actors, we want to be fully engaged in this. We don't just want it to be business as usual. We have signed a letter, we have signed a position paper saying this is what we expect from the UN Tech Envoy. We want this person to address these issues that nobody wants to talk about. We've sent that position paper. At the Web Foundation, we have a contract for the web that says this is what we expect citizens, government, industry, everyone has a role and everyone also has a responsibility. We cannot just be fooling ourselves and saying that we are digitally cooperating. It's not true. In ending with Africa, in as much as we want to attack global community, what's your dialogue at the national level? How are you doing your national IGF? Or is it just that the minister will throw in a speech and then walk away because every other thing that is being discussed is none of his business? So what's the state of your own national dialogue? Who are the African countries asking for this global statement on trust and security? Where are we? How far are we with internet shutdowns? I just sent a congratulatory message to Burkina Faso. They've done a presidential and legislative elections. They did not have to shut down the internet. Some of us are sitting here, we say and even we have civil society organizations calling on governments to shut down the internet. How do you want digital cooperation, digital engagement, jobs, and everything we've said, when for anything you catch a cold, you shut down the internet, you sneeze, you shut down the internet? We need to have these discussions and agree that some things are basic if we want to digitally cooperate. I will thank you. I will share some links now. Thanks.
Nena, I'm not letting you go yet. And I think you are giving us all the reality check that I think we all need. And I think it's a reality check that is need both from the top at the leadership level, at the United Nations level, at the Secretary General level, but it's also a reality check that those of us on the ground need, the ones that are doing the nuts and bolts work. But how do we change this? How do we make cooperation real? How do we get government leaders to come to national IGFs and stay and sit in the room, join the breakout sessions, not just give speeches and how do we change that? I know that sounds like a very naive question, but I believe we can change it because I have seen it happen in many places. So how do we break through the protocol barrier, the protocol bottleneck?
So I did not plan this answer, and it's coming from the deepest part of my heart. To everyone attending this session, next time there is a constitution review, let us have it in our constitution that access to broadband internet connectivity with respect to human rights should be part of your fundamental right in a country. If we begin with having this in our constitution, maybe that will kind of head us in the right policy direction. But what we can do today is to review our policy concerning the digital life, whether we call it a digital corporation or we call it ICT or whatever. We need to have a paradigm shift and understand that, like Mokta and every other person was saying, this is job, this is banking, this is life. Okay, I don't want to be ballistic, but I remember those people who were saying schools need not be connected. We have other important things. Now that COVID is here, everybody wants to do remote work. Everybody wants people to work from home. You want people to study from home. You want children to go to school online, but you never cared about connecting schools. Hell yeah. So look at us making a fool of ourselves because we felt that, I mean, how much money have you spent on military defense? And how much money have you spent on your schools? And now what has military defense? Let me stop here and salute all of these frontline workers, all of these teachers who are teaching on TV, who are making it work for people despite all our ills. So come on, guys, let's invest our money where our mouth is and our future is. Someone says our future is in the youth. Let us put our money there, okay? So we have constitutional things to do. We have human rights, internet connectivity as a human right. And I think that we should put our national budgets in our future. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nena. Everyone, we've got about 20 minutes left of our session. I think Nena's point is very challenging, and I think it brings home that digital cooperation is not just about digital cooperation. It's about cooperative governance, accountable governance, about relationships between citizen and state, relationships between different stakeholder groups. I just posted in the chat the 8th area, and I think this 8th area in the UN Secretary General's roadmap is the one about the architecture of digital cooperation, the mechanisms, the institutions and the processes. And I think we need them at national level, and we need them at regional level as well. And in fact, can we have our poll now quickly? The one, Frank, the next one about the how participants feel about regional cooperation. And while Francis brings up the poll, and I just want to direct you to some questions in the Q&A. I'm going to start with the question. Okay, let me pause. Let's first do the poll. I'm not going to distract everyone because I'm advocating for prioritization. So if participants can please look at this poll and just give us a response to it quickly. It's asking, how effective do you feel cooperation is in Africa at regional level? Just waiting a few seconds for more people to respond. Okay, I think that's enough. Francis or Josh, I'm not sure who's supporting us. You can share the result. So I think this gives us an indication of something that we really need to take very seriously. 87% of respondents feel that regional cooperation is not very effective. So that's something that we can reflect on later. Now you can stop sharing the results. Thanks a lot to everyone who responded. Now I want to go to some of the questions. And the issue of terminology, of concepts, of having a common understanding of what we are striving for has come up. And in fact, Yehovi Atuun asked a question in the Q&A. He asks, please define what we mean by artificial intelligence so that we all know what we are talking about. So I think that would be good. Maybe Mokhtar, you can respond to that. Then there was a question from Lydian from Cameroon, who works in the government there, and great to see you here, Lydian. And she's saying, if we want to cooperate, we should point out the issues that are priorities for us, and we should decide what comes first. I think if I understand you correctly, Lydian, you're asking, how do we sit together and actually prioritize? So if someone can respond to that. And then Herman Ramos asked earlier in the session, are we agreed? Is there consensus that the multi-stakeholder approach is the best way of achieving this kind of digital cooperation? And so if some of the panelists are willing to respond to that, but I also want to invite everyone else in the room to share their perspectives on architecture, the architecture of digital cooperation. Are IGFs enough? How can we strengthen the IGF? How can we strengthen national and regional IGFs to achieve stronger institutional basis for digital cooperation? But Mokhtar, can you start by just defining what you mean by artificial intelligence and perhaps also reflecting how it's defined in the Secretary General's report? Mokhtar, if anyone else wants to do that, that would be useful. Even if Mokhtar, are you unmuted?
Yeah, I read, I have posted a definition of UNESCO of AI in the chat. Nowadays there are no single definition of artificial intelligence in the world. And if you have read the SG's digital collaboration roadmap, it said that there has been 160 instruments about artificial intelligence. They might also depending on different definition. Somehow, UNESCO's World Commission on Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology, we have a simpler definition saying that so-called artificial intelligence. It means that to use the machines, computers based on the data and algorithm to be able to practice human functionalities of humans' intelligence, such as perception, learning, reasoning, problem solving, language, interaction, and even creative work and also decision making. I mean, simply we say that artificial intelligence is kind of veiled decision makers of the modern society at all levels. Simply it's invisible, and that's a trend. That's a short answer to the definition. Do you want me to pick more on the artificial AI issues?
No, I think that is actually, that's very useful, that definition. Thanks very much, Zhang Hong. But if you want to have perhaps comment on the question of the architecture of digital cooperation, the mechanisms.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the UN system, the way in which UN agencies are working, the way in which there's collaboration at a regional level, do you feel that we are getting it right? Do you think that the IGFs are getting it right? What do you think we can do to build a stronger architecture? And after you, I want Dawood to respond to this question, because it's something that the Internet Society has worked on so much. But you start first. Zhang Hong, are you?
Yeah.
Did
you want me to? Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were asking Nina. Sorry.
No, I'm asking you briefly to comment on what you think we can do to strengthen the architecture of digital cooperation. What can we do with the IGF, with NRIs, but also amongst UN agencies?
I just want, I like to give you an example, a good practice we have done through this Internet Universality Indicator Assessment. You can see the package of collaboration between UN agencies and national stakeholders, and between the national governments and national civil society and non-state stakeholders. Eventually, they come up with actions. Okay, like for example, in the country of Benin, we have UNESCO has been advocating, endorsed this instrument. And then Benin, we received very strong support from Benin president and also from their ICT policy ministry. So they are very active. They liaise with us. We eventually engaging with also civil society, with researcher. We composed a very solid 30 people multi-stakeholder advisory board, which has the focal point from different ministries. They are not just give a speech. No, it's equal on their personal capacity to really join the advisory board to guide the assessment of the country's performance by governments, by privacy, by private sector, to neutrally to guide the assessment. Eventually, the assessment formulates some recommendations. Then we had a wider multi-stakeholder meeting to seriously look at each recommendations. At this point, you will see the different actors, they are really having conflicting priorities. The governments want to push for maybe connectivity, civil society wants to push for the human rights. It's really an art of compromise. But without this kind of real debates, conflict solving process, you wouldn't be able to really to build this policy discussion on really evidence, on this consensus. So eventually, if you look at and this tedious because it's come back and forth, and also UNESCO also has been strongly supported this kind of multi-stakeholder practice. We really attend from beginning to the end to as just equal footing. We just discussed. We keep everybody minds open. Eventually, I found this very good result. For example, in Benin, after assessment is assessed, because everybody feels they had a strong ownership, particularly the government, they also formulate a follow-up committee to oversee how those policy recommendations could be put in place. They're taking action.
Sorry to interrupt you, but so these national assessments can actually kickstart a national collaborative process. Absolutely. But now I want to jump to Dawood. Dawood, do you think that that institutions, as ISOC, as the Internet Society, you work with governments, you work with the UN, you work with the African Union Commission, and you work with the private sector and civil society. What do you think we need to do to build stronger mechanisms, and what role do you see for the IGF?
I think in the last decade or more, the IGF has served really its purpose. Some of us remember that when it started, there was practically no discussion between the various stakeholders. And we have seen that by talking across various sectors, between various stakeholders, we have managed to solve many problems that we think were difficult to solve. I think we might, for example, give the example of what happened in Kenya when they had the problem of submarine cable, and the government sat down with the private sector, and they found a solution that they thought was not there. So I think we have learned in the last decade or more that it is important, and we will benefit by doing that. Now, it's true that it's not always easy. It's sometimes difficult because they have, as some of you said, different priorities, different ways of working, etc. But I think it's not a good reason not to continue to do it. I think we have maybe to improve it. Some of the things that I believe needs to be improved, we have to be maybe more inclusive. Sometimes I have the impression it's the same people who are talking, and I think we have to bring more people to the table. We have also to be more agile because the world is changing. Sometimes I realize that, for example, I don't see a lot of the startup community in those discussions, and they are very important for what is happening in Africa right now. So we have to learn from the past, and I think we shouldn't be prescriptive. We shouldn't say this is the way we should do it. It depends on where it is, but we should encourage more discussion in different ways, and be open to talk to each other and trust each other. I heard someone say that we should have trust, and this is something that has been lacking, and we should have more of it. Thank you.
Okay, so next, Anna, what about you? Do you feel, if you look at national processes, regional processes, IGFs, but other structures as well, what would you do to strengthen the architecture of digital cooperation?
Yeah, just unmute myself. What I'll do is to ensure that the intention to promote cooperation is part of the design of whatever we're embarking on in the first place. And I'll give you an example, right? Earlier I spoke about the importance of, ensuring that children are included in our programs and infrastructure and activities around digital inclusion and all of that. And Inena also spoke about the importance of having schools connected and all of that. Now, one of the things we're doing at the EdTech Hub, and this is a global research and innovation group which AFLAB is part of, focused on carrying out research and also identifying innovative EdTech solutions that can improve learning outcomes and provide access to education to children. Now, we work across different strands, right? So there's research, innovation, and engagement, right? And research is focused on finding existing evidence and conducting new research. Innovation is about matching promising technology with location, so actual school districts, local school districts across various African locations, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. And then engagement is focused on advising country-level decision makers. So we're talking about policymakers, again, the school districts and other partners for the purpose of building partnerships and adopting the right policies to ensure that education thrives. Now, all these engagements have various stakeholders, across board. So under research, we have, the researchers and the likes. Under innovation strand, we have the innovators, we have the technology startups developing these solutions, we have the incubators and accelerators that are incubating the ideas and providing support. Under engagement, we have the policymakers, development partners, and all of that. We also have our broader funders, the Gates Foundation and FCDO and other funders. Now, what we've done is ensure that from the design phase, we included all these stakeholders and built out a strategy to ensure that they are involved in every step of the way, right? Now, this is different from the usual approach of let's say, identifying an EdTech solution, and then we go meet a government or policymaker afterwards and say, it's worked, or we go meet a school afterwards and say, it'll be a good idea for you to adopt these technologies among your teachers. That is when there's a lot of situation around people not understanding the purpose of activities or policies or pushing for or interventions and all of that. But ensuring that whatever we plan, whatever we're looking to achieve in terms of digital cooperation along various strands and along various priorities, which we've discussed today, we bring everyone to the table from the onset and design these strategies in a way that everyone is basically included. And then there's the feedback loop along the way. So there's constant knowledge sharing, there's constant engagement and all of that. Now, it's not easy. I'm going to be very honest with you. It's one thing to bring a policymaker and the government to the room and everyone agrees and then it's time for implementation, it's a different story. But it makes things slightly easier to ensure that involvement and engagement is there from the onset. So I would say that is one way to strengthen the architecture generally. It starts from the design phase, basically, of whatever we're trying to achieve.
I think you're touching on a challenge which I think the Digital Cooperation Roadmap, the UN Secretary General's process will have to take into account, which is that the mechanics of digital cooperation actually starts at the institutional level, at the network level, like your level, at the design level, and it starts bottom up. But ultimately, to have that feedback loop and to make sure it all hangs together, you need a global process and you need a more top-down process. And I think that will be one of the challenges of this roadmap, to not invest only in the top-down, the global level of cooperation, but also to invest in the nuts and bolts, the design, the day-to-day implementation level of cooperation, to build it into all our initiatives. But we need to come to a close. So I'm going to move now to the next panelist, Pierre. Pierre, what would be the one thing that you would like to see changing in how we operate and how we build our architecture for digital cooperation in Africa? What's the one thing that you think will bring about positive change?
Thank you very much, Harriet. Well, this is not a simple question, but I would say we need to be result sort of oriented, meaning once we do have the priorities, mechanisms should be in place to actually gauge the impact. And one of the other things I'm seeing is the leadership that you need on the country level. A colleague from UNESCO was citing the example of Benin, where, of course, they work on indicators and upon the indicators that UNESCO, provided to them, and they do have a kind of national sort of consultations. And but I was there at some point, and I saw that most of the things, happen, and great decisions were taken to follow up with this because the ministry, because the government was fully part of this, and they came up with a kind of multi-stakeholder model to discuss those things. So I would say we need to be result-driven, and that this thing is important to changing lives, so that when we mean priority area, it's not just about government, it's about private sector, it's about the users at large. So how do we strike that balance, to sort of having leadership at all levels that make sure that we really think about the result. It's about working properly to meet the result, the priorities. So that's what I would say, in a nutshell. A multi-stakeholder model for me is key. Of course, that's what ICANN is all about. It's about policy making to all levels. It's not just about, it's not top-down at all. Board never decided if we didn't have any discussion from the different stakeholders from the bottom up approach, and it works. So I would think yes, in countries or regions we might aim to this sort of working multi-stakeholder. One has to have a say, but of course time will come to implement, and that's where the leadership can make a difference. Thank you.
Sorry, I lost you there a little bit. I have just been told that our panelist from Niger is here. He wasn't here when we started, so my sincere apologies. Honorable, I did not know that you were in the room. So please, can I give you the floor to share your perspectives? Are you there? I did introduce you at the beginning, so people do know who you are. And there I can see you need to unmute yourself. Honorable Masani. Good, we can see you and we can hear you.
Je voulais vous dire que Massani vient de quitter, il a dit qu'il a un empêchement. Je pense que c'est Makassal qui doit transmettre en fait le communiqué qu'il voudrait faire. Il vient juste de quitter. Voilà. Merci.
I'm so sorry, I don't have access to the interpretation. So Nena, can you help me here? Can you just...
Okay, so that was not Honorable Masani himself, but someone was on his seat. So you're good.
So is he with us?
Not. No, Masani himself is not with us, but his computer is on and his colleague is sitting in his place.
And does his colleague want to address us?
Yeah, I think he has a few words to say on behalf of Honorable.
So please go ahead.
Je n'ai pas de mots à dire. C'est juste pour vous dire qu'il est empêché, il vient de quitter. Juste, il vous salue et vraiment, Makar, c'est peut donner en fait confirmation de la note qu'il voudrait vous dire. Je pense que Makar, s'il est en ligne, il peut peut-être prendre la parole au nom de Massani pour donner vraiment ce que Massani voudrait communiquer. Je vous remercie.
Thanks very much. I understand that we do have Honorable Masani's communique, and that will be shared with everyone.
Yes.
Makan, can you confirm that we will have access to it? I'm not sure if Makan can speak, but good. So my sincere apologies. I wasn't aware that he had arrived, but he did have a prepared statement, and participants, we promise that we will share that with you.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Makan.
Yes, I was muted throughout, so that's why I didn't even have a button to unmute myself. But I was following up what you were saying. So that's why I couldn't alert you that Masani was here. We spoke on phone, he left. He was not there at the beginning, of course, but he joined you later on. And he had a communique from the West African IGF Parliamentary Network, which was established 3 weeks ago in Niamey. And his communique was about that parliamentary network and the launch of the African network of parliamentarians during this African IGF. And the concept note is ready, it is already here, and his communique also, his speech is also with me.
Thanks very much, Makan, and please convey my apology. I will respond to him. He also did not respond to my email, so that's why I was not sure. But just for everyone's information, when I mentioned that the 8th area in the Secretary General's roadmap has to do with the architecture of digital cooperation, parliamentarians have come up. And in fact, at the IGF, at the global IGF, we are planning to introduce a parliamentary track, not just at the annual event, but as an ongoing process. And we think that this is something that national and regional IGFs can also build in, as African IGF has done, to build that into your annual process. Focus specifically on parliamentarians and making sure that they do come into the room. We are now running out of time, almost. I'm going to ask Francis to bring up the last poll, and then I'm going to ask Nena and Maktar to make the final inputs. So Francis, if you can bring up the poll about national cooperation. And this one is really just asking everyone in the room with us how you feel about how effective is digital cooperation in your country at national level. And again, I know Alison Gilwell pointed out earlier that different regions are different. Of course, different countries are different, but this is just to get a general sense of what people's perception is. So if everyone can try and fill this in, it just takes a second. How effective do you feel digital cooperation is in your country at national level? Just wait a second more. Okay, we can share the results, Francis. So here you can all see the results. It illustrates, well, there's one person who feels that their country is cooperating very effectively at national level. They should feel free to share that in the chat. And then most people, 78%, 21 people who responded feel that it's not effective. And I would say that I do think we can do more at national level. I really think that it is an area that we can do more in. So Francis, you can take the results away, and thanks a lot for your support. So I'm going to go back now to Maktar. Maktar, what is the one thing you feel we can do in Africa to strengthen digital cooperation? And I want you to actually respond to a question as you answer. And Nena, this is for you as well, because you'll be the last speaker. Are we using our regional processes well enough? Are we using the African Union Commission's efforts Are we taking advantage of what exists? Is that something else that we should start prioritizing? So Maktar, what do you say? What do you think is the one thing you'd like to see? And do you think Africans are doing enough to make use of efforts and opportunities that exist to cooperate? Are you still with us, Maktar?
I think the question 3 is very interesting. Yeah. When you look at this question, you have 23% for effective, agree on effective. But the issue is if we have it by country, it will be more pertinent, because the only thing we need in Africa is a leadership, digital leadership. The country where we have a digital leadership, we can do easily this digital cooperation. Why you have this 4%, I think this 4% is represent 1 or 2 countries in Africa. We need the involvement of the government in the digital cooperation. We can talk as UN, as an organization, digital cooperation, but at the national level, without the involvement of the government, we are not going to have this digital cooperation happen, because we need the involvement of all actors, private sector, academia, and civil society, under the leadership of the government. And we need to have a strong leadership at the country level. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Maktar. I think that is very important. And I think that, you know, the multi-stakeholder approach we agree that it is an important approach. But if governments are not participating actively in the multi-stakeholder approach, that weakens the multi-stakeholder approach. So I think there really is a call on governments to be more present, to be more proactive, and to be part of these processes. And Nena, you have the last word before we close the session, before I give to Adil, and I hope Adil will share some of his wisdom with us. Do you think we are using our African institutions and processes enough? And what is the one thing you would like to see us do better?
Thank you, Henriette. I believe we have the institutions, continental and regional, and most of our countries also have agencies that are mandated to do things. We may not have been doing them enough, but I think that COVID has taught us that we cannot always blame other people. Everybody has a role to play. And so my final word will be, yes, we have our stuff, but then you know this, it is a very simple technology that everybody now knows. Please wear your mask. Wear your mask, because my security depends on your security, and your security depends on mine. Governments have their part to play. Industry has their part to play, and every human being has their part to play. As an African, you recognize that if we did not wear our masks, if we had not obeyed, the whole world expected that we will be the ones to die most. So please, the same way you keep social distancing, you sanitize your hands and you wear your mask, play your part. The UN will play its part, AU will play its part, but you wear a mask. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nena, and thanks everyone. I think that this was a very rich session. I think Adil, the African IGF, can say to the UN Secretary General that African stakeholders are deeply committed to digital cooperation, and that we want to be part of the process, but that we think it happens bottom up as well as top down, and that it's not easy. That it needs to be built in at the design level, as Anna was saying. It needs to take place at national level, at regional level, and amongst all stakeholders. And I would actually still challenge myself and everyone else in the room. I think we do need to prioritize. I know all of those areas are priorities for us, but if we cannot actually build more basic digital equality on the continent, if there's not more widespread basic equitable access, it's going to be very difficult to build on top of that, to build the capacity at the level of industry and at the level of the technical community, and to take advantage of AI opportunities. So I still do think that connectivity, basic connectivity, and making sure that it's meaningful, that people have the digital capacity and the skills to use that connectivity is a priority amongst all the other priorities. But Adil, back to you, and thanks very much, panelists, for your passionate and informed input.
Thank you very much, Henriette. So this was the icing on the cake, Henriette. So you managed to navigate through all this pillar. It was not easy, but of course, if anyone who could do it, it's you. So for all of you, every time I think I would put Henriette in a difficult spot, she always keeps